Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Robert always believed that happiness was constructed day by day. For him, there were no magical formulas or extraordinary moments. What mattered were the simple things. Opening his grocery store early, greeting the neighbors, carefully restocking the shelves, and in the late afternoon returning home where Lisa would be waiting with a calm embrace and some comment about a dog she had rescued. It was an unglamorous routine but full of significance. Their marriage was admired by most people in town. While he took care of providing for the household, she dedicated herself to abandoned animals with genuine passion. Many people found it beautiful. They said they were a couple that completed each other. Lisa was tireless. She lived surrounded by campaigns, adoption fairs, and partnerships with veterinary clinics. Sometimes she came home exhausted with muddy stains on her pants or the strong smell of medications used in rescues. She had stories to tell about animals saved at the last minute, about litters found in vacant lots, about dogs hit by cars that she helped rehabilitate. Robert listened with interest, even when fatigue pulled him towards sleep. He admired her strength, her sense of purpose. He never minded her absence on weekends or her late-night outings. He trusted her. In fact, this had always been the foundation of their relationship, mutual trust. When she said she was going to sleep at the shelter to monitor an animal in need of constant care, he wished her good night and locked the door from inside. For a long time, everything seemed stable. There was affection, respect, and although romance was no longer as intense as in the early years, there was a silent connection that sustained the bond. Robert didn't expect passionate declarations or elaborate surprises. Her presence beside him, the food ready on the table, the clean clothes in the drawer, all of that was love translated into practice for him. And seeing the sparkle in her eyes when she spoke of a rescued puppy was enough to warm his heart. That's why the first changes didn't catch much attention. A meeting outside regular hours, an emergency commitment on a Sunday, a call she answered more discreetly than usual. Nothing seemed alarming. He knew volunteer work could be demanding, and she spoke with such conviction that it sounded natural. But gradually, some pieces began not to fit. Certain stories repeated themselves with different names. She seemed distracted at home, more connected to her phone, less interested in conversation. The explanation was plausible, but the frequency of these situations increased. Robert tried to push away any negative thoughts. He told himself it was just stress and accumulated fatigue. And for a few weeks, he lived each day as if everything was fine. Until one Monday morning while organizing the cash register at the grocery store, he received an unexpected visit. An elderly customer, Mrs. Henderson, mentioned that she had left a donation of dog food at the shelter on Saturday night, but no one showed up to receive it. She said she waited for over 20 minutes and eventually left, worried about the animals. Robert was surprised. Lisa had said she stayed at the shelter that night precisely to take care of a dog suspected of having parvovirus. The customer's words didn't align with what his wife had reported. It was a simple detail, but enough to awaken a discomfort he could no longer push under silence. From the moment he heard the customer's comment, something changed within Robert. It was as if part of him had awakened from a long state of denial. He didn't say anything to Lisa that night. He simply observed how she arrived smiling, how she hugged the dogs upon entering the house, how she spoke about the shelter with enthusiasm as if nothing was out of place. And that hurt. Doubt began to grow quietly, taking root. He had always been a calm man, but this time he couldn't pretend anymore that it was just his head playing tricks on him. The voice that once whispered now screamed. Then he decided he needed a concrete answer, one that would end that anguish once and for all. Either it would confirm that everything was a misunderstanding or he would discover what lay behind Lisa's gentle eyes. In the following days, he tried to extract small bits of information discreetly. He asked where she had been, commented on the cases of animals she claimed to have rescued. He tested details, but Lisa seemed prepared. She responded calmly, citing names, times, places. Everything was believable. But the more she explained, the more he doubted. It was as if every word was carefully chosen, as if everything had already been rehearsed. So on a Tuesday morning, Robert searched the internet for investigation services. He wanted something discreet without fanfare. He found the name of David Thompson, a private detective with good recommendations. He called, set up a quick meeting at a cafe, and explained his case with objectivity. David listened attentively, took notes, and accepted the job. He said it would take only 3 days to get a concrete answer. Robert spent those days as if living two worlds at the same time. At work, he served customers, organized the inventory, managed the cash register. At home, he kept the routine, answered his wife's questions normally, listened to her stories. But inside, all the while, his head weighed heavily. Every time Lisa went out, he checked the clock. Every time she came back, he tried to find something different, the perfume, the bag, the clothes. He searched for anything that might reveal more than she was saying. But everything seemed calculated, as if she knew she was being watched, as if she had trained every gesture. On the night of the third day, David called. He said the material was ready and preferred to deliver it in person. They set up a meeting at the same cafe. Robert left home saying he needed to pick up a shipment from the supplier, and he did. He sat at the table, and a few minutes later David arrived with a folder. He handed it over with a serious look and said only, "You have the right to know." Robert opened it right there. Inside the folder there was a sequence of photographs, all in sharp color with dates and times in the bottom corner. In at least 4 of them, Lisa appeared smiling, embracing a man Robert didn't immediately recognize, but turning the next page revealed the face. Marcus, the veterinarian from the city, married, father of 2 young children. In the following photos, Lisa and Marcus were at a roadside motel, entering together, leaving hours later. Everything was there. Impossible to dispute. The shock was immediate. Robert didn't feel anger. He felt a strange emptiness. It was as if his body had been drained of everything he believed. The image he had of his wife, of his life, of the marriage, of the peaceful routine suddenly seemed like a constructed scenario. It was hard to accept that she had used exactly what made her most admirable, the love for animals, as a curtain to hide something so dirty. Even harder was imagining the coldness in her eyes every night, pretending that everything was as it always was. He didn't know what hurt more, the betrayal itself or the way it was built. Marcus was married, just like Lisa, and yet they found time to live a lie on top of 2 families. The shelter, which once represented hope, now became the stage for lies. Robert thanked the detective, paid the agreed amount, put the evidence in his backpack, and left the cafe without saying anything else. Getting into his car, he remained for several minutes with his head resting on the steering wheel. He wanted to understand when his life had deviated so far from what he believed. The silence inside was absolute. After a while, he took a deep breath, started the engine, and headed home. On the way, he didn't make plans, didn't rehearse speeches, didn't prepare for confrontations. He just drove. Every mile traveled was a confirmation that the man who existed before the photos had stayed in the cafe. The one returning home was someone else, someone who had lost something essential, but still had enough dignity to not live within a lie. Robert had just placed the folder with the photos in the passenger seat and was preparing to start the car when his phone vibrated. It was Lisa. Her voice sounded normal, calm, as if nothing was happening. She said she was going directly to the shelter, that some puppies had been left at the door, and that she might take a while to get home. Robert replied with a simple, "Okay," without changing his tone. He put the phone in his pocket and for a few moments sat still with his eyes fixed on the road ahead. That call only reinforced what the photo showed. While he carried the weight of the truth, she continued pretending everything was the same. On the way back, Robert felt his heart weigh down. Lisa's calm voice was almost cruel. He recognized that tone. It was the same one she used when talking about a rescue, when mentioning the name of a new puppy, when saying she needed more space at the shelter, and thinking that in so many instances he had taken pride in it. The woman he loved, lying so easily for so long. Arriving home, Robert dropped his backpack by the door and stood there for a while, as if trying to decide what to do with all of that. He got a glass of water, went upstairs, sat on the edge of the bed, but didn't even take off his shoes. The unease grew. He stood up and went downstairs again. He looked at the clock. Just over half an hour since the call. He grabbed his car keys and left. The decision was made. He needed to look her in the eyes. Hear her try to explain. See how far she would go with that lie. So he headed to the shelter. The front of the shelter was all locked up, no lights on, complete silence. He parked the car right in front of the main gate and stood there watching for a few seconds. He took out his phone and called. She answered quickly as if she wasn't expecting any conflict. "Are you at the shelter?" he asked directly. "Yes, I'm here. I just got here a little while ago." "The puppies are pretty weak," she said without hesitation. "Then come out here. I'm in front. I need to talk to you." Silence took over the line. He could hear her breathing. It was the sound of someone caught off guard. A pause long enough to confirm what he already knew. "Not now," she replied, trying to stay composed. "I'm taking care of one of the puppies. It's really bad." "Then open the door. I'll come in. We can talk inside." More silence. She took a deep breath as if trying to gain time. I can't now. Seriously." "Okay, then. I'll stay here until you come out, even if it takes the whole night." He hung up, leaned back in the car, and crossed his arms. That was already enough. Her words, the delays, the diverted glances, the disappearances, the ready-made excuses. Now, the refusal to open the door. It was a theater, a role she played perfectly. But every play loses control eventually. 15 minutes later, the headlights of a car lit up the street and parked next to Robert's vehicle. It was her. The face he had known for so many years. Lisa got out slowly, holding the key in one hand and the phone in the other. She was tense, but tried to keep her voice steady. "I got confused. I was somewhere else taking care of the puppies, but at a farm. A friend asked for help. My head is full these days." Robert observed for a few seconds without saying anything. He pointed to the passenger seat. She got in. She didn't say anything else. She was restless, looking around, unable to fix her gaze on him. Robert then unzipped his backpack, pulled out the brown envelope, and handed it to her without saying a word. Lisa took it with both hands, opened it slowly, as if she already knew what was inside. With each photo she turned, her expression changed. Her breathing became irregular. Her eyes filled with tears. She turned to him with a choked voice, no longer able to hide. "I'm sorry. It happened. I didn't plan it." Tears ran down her face. Her shoulders trembled, but Robert kept looking forward as if everything was already decided within him since the moment he saw the first photo. Robert remained silent for a few seconds, looking ahead as if finishing a thought. Then he turned the key, started the car, and pulled away. Lisa, still with red eyes, tried to figure out what was happening. "Where are you going?" "My car is there," she said. "We'll be back soon," he replied without looking at her. She crossed her arms, pressed her lips, and didn't ask anything else. She knew at this point that anything she said wouldn't change the decisions he had already made. The road followed in absolute silence. Robert drove steadily, without hesitation at any moment. He stopped the car in front of a house Lisa recognized. She recognized the facade, the gate, the number. Marcus's house. She turned her face to him with wide eyes, as if only now realizing where they were. "Please don't do this," she murmured, her voice choked. "That's enough, Robert." But he had already gotten out of the car and gone to the doorbell. He rang once, waited, rang again. Lisa got out of the car, went to him, and gently pulled his arm. "Let's go, please. This will only hurt more people." Robert didn't say a word. He just held the envelope with the evidence in his hands. The door opened. It was Marcus's wife, hair tied up, expression of exhaustion. She seemed confused to see Robert there. Then she looked at Lisa, who was visibly shaken. "What's going on?" Robert extended the envelope. "You need to know." She took the envelope without fully understanding. Robert turned his back and went back to the car. Lisa hesitated for a second, then followed him. As they entered, he remained silent until he turned the corner. They arrived at her car. He parked beside it with the engine still running. "Get out." She hesitated. He looked forward and added, "You don't live there anymore." Without anything to respond, she took the key from her purse and got out. Robert left shortly after without looking back. Lisa spent that night at a friend's house. In the following days, lawyers took over the communications. The divorce process was simple. The house, which was an inheritance from Robert's father, remained with him. The grocery store also. What was left for Lisa were some joint investments, which by agreement were divided. Besides that, she had nothing, no support, no base. Marcus's wife didn't remain idle either. After receiving the envelope, she confronted her husband, who initially tried to deny it, but eventually confessed. A few days later, she filed for separation. The scandal spread through the town at an alarming speed. The two betrayers, once seen as respectable, began to be avoided. Comments ran rampant everywhere. At the market, the beauty salon, the square, the church. Marcus's clinic lost clients day by day. Within 2 months, he had to close it down. Lisa, without the structure Robert provided, rented a small apartment and had to find a job. She had to learn to live on her own. For years, she had dedicated herself to the shelter, to volunteering, but now it was she who needed help. Months passed. Robert continued with his life. The grocery store remained strong. The neighbors who supported him from the beginning continued to admire him. No one saw him making a scene. No one heard a single harsh word come from his mouth. And perhaps because of that, many learned from him. Because sometimes justice isn't done by shouting. It's done with firmness, truth, and dignity. And that's what remained of the story. The fall of those who pretended too much and the peace of someone who chose to move forward with his head held high. After everything came to light and the marriages ended, Marcus and Lisa, perhaps by impulse, perhaps out of fear of being alone, tried to follow each other. They began to see each other more often without needing to hide. They dined, watched movies, shared guilt in silence. For a few weeks, they acted as if they were building something new from the ruins. But the illusion lasted little. What was once done in secret, fed by risk and fantasy, was now exposed to the harsh light of reality. They no longer looked at each other with the same desire. Unwillingly, they began to compare each other to their ex-partners. Lisa missed the emotional stability of Robert, the serenity with which he faced life. Marcus, on the other hand, realized that Lisa was very different from his ex-wife, who always organized everything and kept the family balanced. What remained between them was an uncomfortable silence full of regret and subtle demands. Small arguments began to appear. Minor misunderstandings became reasons for distancing. The glow that once blinded them no longer existed. And when they finally realized they weren't loving each other anymore, perhaps they had never truly loved, they decided to step back without ceremony, without promises, without drama. They simply understood that what united them had been just a passing illusion. Lisa, now living on a modest salary at a pet food store, struggled to keep up with the bills. There was barely anything left by the end of the month. Responsibilities weighed heavily, and so did loneliness. After missing 2 months of rent, she called her mother and with a choked voice asked for shelter. She returned to the city where she was born, carrying her suitcase, her guilt, and the certainty that she had destroyed everything that mattered most. Marcus, embarrassed by the rejection from the town and the failure of his clinic, also decided to leave. He opened a small veterinary clinic on the outskirts a few kilometers away. He wanted to stay close to his children whom he saw on weekends. He tried to start anew without fanfare, without looking back. The town that once admired him now only murmured his name in a tone of disappointment. In the end, each went separate ways, but carrying the weight of the choices they made. There was no reconciliation, only the empty spaces left behind by broken trust in the life that one day was promising until it was lost in the shadows of lies. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.
Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Andrew Collins was 42 years old and had a life many of his colleagues considered stable and enviable. A software engineer, he'd built a solid career at a tech company in Houston. He lived with his wife, Melissa, in a comfortable suburban home surrounded by well-kept gardens and neighbors who saw them as the model couple. Their marriage radiated normalcy and security. There were no public fights, no frequent arguments friends could notice. In fact, to outsiders, Andrew and Melissa represented exactly what so many families strive for: stability, partnership, and an organized life. They had a routine blending professional commitments, social gatherings, and small daily rituals. On Saturdays, they'd host backyard barbecues and invite neighbors for long conversations stretching into the afternoon. On Sundays, it was common to watch movies on the couch, eating popcorn like teenagers. Their annual trips were the highlight of their life together. They'd already visited parts of the East Coast, some national parks, and were planning a trip to Hawaii soon. Those were moments when they laughed together, took photos for albums, and reinforced the bond that seemed so unshakable. Melissa, for her part, worked in the events department for the Regional Health Network. She had a natural talent for organizing conferences, conventions, and lectures. She was praised for how she handled unexpected problems, always keeping a smile on her face and maintaining professionalism. Andrew was proud to see his wife recognized by colleagues and superiors. He often said Melissa had a gift for turning chaos into order. He, more reserved, admired her from afar, preferring to support and celebrate each of her achievements. To everyone's eyes, their marriage showed no cracks. Conversations flowed naturally, their glances were still exchanged with ease. There was none of that constant shadow that usually haunts couples in crisis. On the contrary, Andrew felt he was beside a partner with whom he shared life, dreams, and responsibilities. That's exactly why the trip to Dallas seemed so promising. Melissa had been assigned to coordinate a major health conference bringing together renowned doctors from across the country. For her, it was a chance to demonstrate even more competence on a bigger professional stage. For Andrew, it was an opportunity to accompany his wife, support her work, and at the same time enjoy a few days away from the heavy office routine. He'd secured a short leave, determined to turn those moments into something special. The plan was simple: Melissa would handle her professional obligations during the day, but in the evenings, they could dine at different restaurants, stroll through downtown Dallas, visit museums, and maybe even catch a show. Andrew liked the idea of mixing work and leisure, believing the trip would further strengthen their connection. On the drive into the city, the mood in the car was light. They talked about conference preparations, reminisced about past trips, and even discussed possibilities for next summer. Andrew, driving, looked at Melissa with tenderness. She spoke excitedly about the event's details, confirmed speakers, and the responsibility of making sure everything went perfectly. There was enthusiasm in her voice, something he'd always found captivating. Arriving at the hotel reserved by the organizers, Melissa was warmly greeted by the staff. Andrew watched from a distance, proud, remembering how many times she'd started from scratch in her career until reaching this point. They went up to their room, dropped off their bags, and immediately started planning their first evening, a walk around the city followed by a quiet dinner at a local restaurant. It was the kind of outing they'd always enjoyed. During dinner, there was no sign of tension. Melissa was animated, commenting on the logistical challenges of the event and joking about how Andrew would have to listen to doctors talk about health for hours, even though he wasn't in the field. He laughed, found it amusing, and felt comfortable in that setting. Nothing suggested anything was wrong. Wine was served, they toasted to her success and the trip, and returned to the hotel like a couple who simply seemed happy to be together. Lying in bed that first night in Dallas, Andrew believed the trip would be a positive milestone. He thought about how important it was to reinforce their bond from time to time, especially after years of intense routine and responsibilities. Melissa, beside him, was already sleeping deeply, exhausted from the day's preparations. He looked at her for a few moments, feeling a calmness only a seemingly solid marriage could offer. The next morning, Melissa left early to review conference details. Andrew took the opportunity to walk around the hotel area, grab coffee at a nearby cafe, and watch the city come to life. He was willing to support his wife in every way, even if it meant spending hours alone. He didn't see it as a sacrifice, but as part of the commitment he'd always believed existed between them. As he sipped his coffee, Andrew reflected on how generous life had been to him up to that point. He had a stable career, a comfortable home, loyal friends, and a wife he believed he could trust. He'd built the narrative of a man who'd successfully balanced work and family, without excessive drama or unexpected turbulence. He was grateful for that. What Andrew didn't know, and couldn't have imagined at that moment, was that this seemingly ordinary, peaceful trip held secrets capable of transforming his perception of his own marriage. What appeared solid and unchangeable was about to be shaken by revelations he'd never anticipated. But that morning in Dallas, sitting before a steaming cup of coffee, everything still seemed exactly as it should be: stable, reliable, safe. The morning after the conference's first day, Andrew came down to the hotel breakfast a little later than Melissa. She'd already left in a hurry, her notebook tucked under her arm and her badge hanging from her neck. It was typical. Melissa had an almost obsessive tendency to review every detail before events began. Andrew understood that rhythm well. He himself, in his own work, knew how essential precision was. The lobby was full of participants, doctors, coordinators, and vendors moving back and forth. Andrew drank his coffee in silence, watching the stream of well-dressed, hurried people. Suddenly, he overheard someone mention the name of one of the speakers, Dr. Brandon Miller. The casual tone of the conversation caught Andrew's attention, but at that moment it was nothing more than mild curiosity. Just another name among many professionals who'd be present during the event. Later, while Melissa returned to the room to change clothes before lunch, she casually remarked, "Dr. Miller is one of the big draws of the conference. He's revolutionizing some methods in cardiology. People are eager to hear what he has to say." Andrew noticed a different kind of enthusiasm in her voice, something beyond simple professional admiration. But he chose not to misinterpret it. He knew Melissa valued competence, and maybe that was all it was. Still, a faint, uncomfortable twinge settled in. At lunch, they sat at a large table, sharing space with other coordinators and speakers. Melissa was radiant, leading the conversation, making everyone laugh with little behind-the-scenes stories. At one point, Brandon arrived and joined the group. Andrew watched closely. He was a charismatic man, with engaging speech and confident posture. He greeted Melissa with familiarity, lightly touching her shoulder as he leaned in to say hello. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but Andrew didn't miss it. Throughout the meal, Brandon directed many of his comments toward Melissa. She, in turn, seemed flattered by the attention, responding enthusiastically, laughing at his remarks. Andrew tried to join the conversation but noticed his presence was almost peripheral. There was no overt disrespect, just a subtle chemistry between them that didn't go unnoticed. It was at that moment Andrew felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time: jealousy. Not jealousy born of imagination, but triggered by clear signs, however disguised. That evening, the couple had planned to go out for dinner at a nearby restaurant. Melissa, however, gave last-minute notice that she needed to attend a quick meeting with some speakers, including Brandon, to iron out details for the next morning. "It won't take long, I promise," she said, kissing him on the cheek before leaving. Andrew stayed alone in the room, staring at the TV without really paying attention. The clock ticked on, and the supposedly quick meeting had already stretched past an hour. Driven by restlessness, Andrew decided to head down to the lobby. He searched discreetly until he spotted Melissa in a side hallway, away from the main flow of people. She was leaning against the wall, speaking in a low tone with Brandon. It wasn't just the content of the conversation, it was their body language that caught his eye. She was smiling in a conspiratorial way, and at one point he held her arm, leaning in even closer. Then they exchanged a quick, almost furtive kiss, enough for Andrew to feel the ground vanish beneath his feet. There was no longer room for doubt. He didn't step forward, didn't interrupt. He stood a few seconds watching from afar, his stomach churning and his heart pounding erratically. His mind briefly tried to rationalize, maybe it was a thoughtless gesture, maybe he'd misinterpreted. But there was no denying what he'd seen. That scene was clear and definitive. The kiss confirmed Melissa had already crossed the line that could never be erased. Returning to the room unnoticed, Andrew lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. 1,000 thoughts invaded him, as if every memory of their marriage was now a stained piece. He'd never imagined his wife in that kind of situation, and the trust they'd built over the years suddenly seemed to have turned into an abyss. Still, he wasn't the kind of man who'd wait weeks or months to gather evidence. His impulsive nature wouldn't let him sleep peacefully without acting. The kiss he'd witnessed left no room for excuses or justifications, it was the proof he'd been missing. A few minutes later, Andrew picked up his phone and sent a short message: "I'm waiting for us to have dinner. Will you be much longer?" The reply came quickly: "Sorry, honey, got caught up in details here. I'm on my way up." The casual tone of her message made the weight of betrayal feel even heavier. Melissa showed not a trace of guilt, on the contrary, she seemed skilled at concealing the truth, as if nothing had happened in that hallway. When she entered the room, she appeared smiling, with the same calm she used on any ordinary day. She dropped her bag on the armchair, kicked off her shoes, and said, "The meeting took longer than I expected. But everything's set for tomorrow. Can we order room service? I'm exhausted." Andrew watched her in silence. Every gesture now seemed rehearsed, every word sounded like a well-practiced lie. The kiss he'd seen was a ghost standing between them, invisible to her but impossible for him to ignore. Andrew agreed to order food to the room, and during the forced dinner, he watched Melissa talk animatedly about the speakers and the challenges of the next day. He barely responded, limiting himself to nods and short words. Inside, the conflict grew. His impulsive nature screamed at him to confront her right then and there, without hesitation. But at the same time, part of him wanted to wait for the right moment, not just to unleash his pain, but to turn the betrayal into something impossible to deny or hide. That night, while Melissa slept peacefully beside him, Andrew stayed awake, replaying the scene. Her calm breathing irritated him. How could she lie next to him after kissing another man just hours earlier? He no longer saw his wife through the same eyes. The chasm between them widened with every passing minute. The next day, he decided to accompany her for part of the conference. He wanted to observe, to confirm with his own eyes whether the intimacy he'd seen in the hallway would repeat itself in public. Sitting at the back of the auditorium, Andrew watched Melissa walk among the guests, greeting colleagues and exchanging glances with Brandon whenever they crossed paths. There was no touching this time, just quick glances and discreet smiles. But for Andrew, that was enough. They were signs of an intimacy he now knew existed. It was at that moment an idea began forming in his mind. If Melissa was capable of betraying him in secret and still presenting herself to everyone as an exemplary woman, perhaps it was precisely in public that the truth should emerge. The kiss in the hallway wouldn't be kept as a bitter secret inside him. It would be the spark for something bigger. Andrew didn't want violence, didn't want empty scandal. What he wanted was poetic justice, something that would make it clear, in front of everyone, who had truly broken the marriage pact. Andrew couldn't stand the silent theater anymore. The kiss in the hallway wouldn't leave his mind, and every time he remembered the scene, anger mixed with a sadness that gnawed at him from within. But it wouldn't be in a private argument, hidden behind four walls, that he'd reveal what he'd seen. Melissa had chosen to betray in silence, but he would choose truth in front of everyone. The main hall was packed. Doctors, coordinators, and guests sat at round tables, waiting for the next round of lectures and the gala night announcements. Melissa, elegant in her blue dress, walked across the stage with a microphone in hand, greeting the audience and thanking each guest for being there. She smiled with the confidence of someone who believed she had everything under control. Brandon, seated in the front, exchanged a quick glance with her, almost imperceptible to others, but far too clear to Andrew. Andrew watched from a side table, his heart racing. He could hear his own heavy breathing as he mentally rehearsed every word. He had no script, no detailed plan. He only had the certainty that this would be the moment his life would change forever. Melissa began speaking about the institution's values, about commitment to ethics and transparency. It was ironic, Andrew thought, to hear those words coming from her mouth, words so far removed from what she lived at home, or rather, what she pretended to live. Then he stood up. Chairs creaked around him as he passed, drawing curious glances. He walked firmly to the side of the stage, raised his hand asking for the microphone, and before anyone could stop him, his voice echoed through the hall. "Excuse me, just a moment." Melissa froze. Her eyes searched for his, confused. "Andrew, what are you doing?" she whispered into the muted mic, trying to keep a smile on her face. He took the microphone from her hands and turned to face the audience. "Good evening, everyone. My name is Andrew Collins, Melissa's husband." A collective murmur rose, a mix of surprise and anticipation. "I just heard my wife speak about commitment and trust, and I thought it important to add something." Melissa tried to intervene, nervous. "Andrew, please, this isn't the time for this." But her voice no longer carried authority, it sounded more like a desperate plea. Andrew continued, his breathing heavy but his voice steady. "You all know this woman as a dedicated professional, someone who guards the institution's image. But I know her in another way too. I know the Melissa who, just a few nights ago, hid in a hallway of this very hotel to kiss a coworker." The hall fell into absolute silence. The only sound echoing was his own confession. Melissa turned pale, brought her hand to her chest, and tried to stammer, "That's not true." Andrew raised his hand, cutting off her attempt to defend herself. "I saw it with my own eyes. It's not rumor, not imagination." "She and Dr. Brandon," he said, pointing to the doctor seated in front, who immediately froze, his face in shock, exchanged a kiss as if her marriage were just an inconvenient detail. The audience reacted with murmurs, disapproving glances, embarrassed expressions. Brandon tried to stand, but someone beside him pulled him back into his seat, whispering for him to stay quiet. Melissa, desperate, tried to regain control. "Andrew, you're twisting things." It was a moment of weakness, nothing more. I can explain." He laughed, a short, bitter laugh. "Explain? You spent years building this perfect image. I believed in it too. Until I saw the truth without makeup, without excuses. A kiss might seem small to some, but to me it was enough to destroy the trust that holds any marriage together. Silence returned. Some people looked at Melissa with pity, others with harsh judgment. Brandon kept his head down, avoiding everyone's gaze. Andrew took a deep breath and concluded, "If there's one thing I've learned these past few days, it's that the worst betrayal isn't against the body, but against trust. And that, Melissa, you've already lost." He handed the microphone to a stunned staff member and walked out of the hall, leaving behind a stunned audience and a wife collapsing in front of her own colleagues. Melissa tried to follow him but was surrounded by co-workers who, embarrassed, asked if it was true. The image she'd built with such care began crumbling before everyone. Brandon, visibly shaken, quietly stood and left through another door, avoiding anyone's gaze. Andrew walked quickly down the hotel's side corridor, trying to escape the buzz from the hall. Behind him, Melissa's heels echoed on the marble floor. She caught up to him near the glass doors leading to the parking lot. Melissa shouted, nearly out of breath. "Andrew, wait. Please, don't just walk away like this." Andrew stopped. His shoulders tensed. Melissa approached, grabbed his arm. He pulled away with a sharp motion. Andrew, without looking at her, said, "What do you want, Melissa?" The audience already applauded. "The show's over." Melissa cried, her voice trembling. "You humiliated me in front of everyone. After everything we built, was this what you chose? To destroy me in public?" Andrew finally turned, his eyes red, his voice low and sharp. "Destroy? You think I wanted this? I gave you years of my life. I gave you trust, support, silence when you needed it, smiles when you failed. And what did you give me in return? A stolen kiss in a dark hallway, as if I were an inconvenience. As if our marriage were an accessory you could take off whenever you wanted." Melissa tried to justify herself, desperate. "It was a mistake, Andrew. A moment of weakness. I never meant to hurt you. I still love you." Andrew laughed, without humor. "Don't lie to me now. Not after everything. If you loved me, you wouldn't have gone near that hallway. If you loved me, you would have looked me in the eyes last night, when I asked if you'd belong, and told me the truth. But you lied so naturally, as if you'd been trained for it." Melissa lowered her head. Tears fell onto her blue dress, now wrinkled. She whispered, "I feel so empty, so lost. Brandon, he made me feel alive again. Like I wasn't just the wife, the organizer, the perfect one, he saw me." Andrew, his voice pained, almost lamenting, replied, "And me? Didn't I see you? Didn't I admire you every day? Didn't I feel proud of every one of your achievements? Did you need a stranger to feel special? Or did you just want the shine of someone new, someone who didn't know your quirks, your flaws, your sleepless nights?" Melissa lifted her eyes, pleading. "We can try again. Therapy. I swear I'll change. I'll end things with him. I'll do anything." Andrew, with infinite sadness, said, "No, Melissa. It's too late. Because now, every time I look at you, I'll see you leaning against that wall. I'll see his fingers on your arm. I'll see the smile you gave him, that smile I thought was only mine. Trust isn't fixed with promises. It breaks with a kiss, and was buried with a microphone." He took a step toward the door. Melissa shouted, desperate. "So that's it? You're throwing me away like trash? After everything?" Andrew replied firmly. "I didn't throw you away. You stepped away first. I just had the courage to say it out loud. And if that destroyed you, maybe it's because you built your life on appearances. I built mine on you. And now I'll have to rebuild everything. Alone." Melissa fell to her knees, sobbing, hugging herself. No one came to help her. Everyone was still inside, watching the spectacle she'd helped create. Andrew, already in the parking lot, sat in his car with trembling hands on the wheel. There was no victory in that gesture, but there was truth. And truth, however painful, had a liberating taste. He hadn't just exposed Melissa. He'd freed himself from a lie that would have imprisoned him for years if he'd chosen to look away. As he drove back to the hotel, he thought about the scene he'd just played out. He didn't see himself as a hero or a victim. Just as a man who chose not to carry the weight of betrayal alone. The future would be uncertain, but at least he wouldn't live anymore under the shadow of a farce. In that moment, Andrew knew, his life was now divided into two parts. Before and after the microphone. The morning after the scandal, the hotel still seemed to carry the echo of Andrew's words. The conference, which should have been remembered as a successful event, was now marked by the public exposure of an affair. Melissa's name was already circulating through hallways and messaging groups, accompanied by curious glances and unsubtle whispers. The environment where she'd always felt respected had become a stage of humiliation. Melissa tried to keep her composure at first, but quickly realized her reputation was in ruins. The Health Network's management, concerned about institutional image, announced her temporary suspension. The temporary was merely a formality. Everyone knew she'd hardly return to the same position. The embarrassment was unbearable. In the following days, Melissa locked herself in the Houston house, avoiding even the neighbors who once praised her and now looked at her with a mix of disdain and curiosity. Brandon, meanwhile, didn't escape unscathed. The doctor, once seen as promising and charismatic, now had his name associated with a married woman and a scandal that spread not only through the company but also through the medical community. Some colleagues openly criticized him, others simply avoided him in silence. The pressure became so intense he requested a transfer to another state, trying to start over where no one knew that story. But for someone who'd always thrived on prestige, that blow was a hard wound to heal. Andrew, meanwhile, experienced a mix of pain and relief. By making clear to everyone what he'd seen, he felt he'd protected his own dignity. Still, the following days weren't easy. There was the emptiness of returning to a house that no longer felt like home. There was the pain of facing memories in every corner, memories that now seemed stained. He knew he needed to make a practical decision. He wasn't a man who delayed things. He called his lawyer and immediately began divorce proceedings. The couple had no children, which made the legal process easier. But emotionally, it was as if Andrew had lost part of himself. Still, his impulsiveness, which in other situations might have led him to rash choices, this time was his salvation. He didn't let the lie drag on, didn't allow the betrayal to be swept under the rug. He preferred the pain of truth to the anesthesia of illusion. Months passed. The divorce was finalized quickly, and Andrew kept the Houston house. Melissa, too ashamed to stay in the same neighborhood, moved to another city, claiming she needed to start over. Their old friends split, some drifted away, others grew closer to Andrew, recognizing his courage. Curiously, some neighbors even praised him for not hiding what happened, saying few men would have shown such strength in the face of betrayal. But the unexpected was yet to come. Andrew, on one of his neighborhood walks, ran into Grace, an old college friend, now divorced and mother to a teenage daughter. They began chatting casually, with no expectations. Gradually, those conversations turned into dinners, dinners into confidences, and confidences into something deeper. Andrew wasn't looking for new love, but he found in Grace someone who understood the scars of a life marked by disappointments. It wasn't an immediate fresh start, but a patient, almost therapeutic rebuilding. Melissa, on the other hand, never managed to restore the image she'd lost. The corporate world is unforgiving, and though she tried to find positions in other companies, the shadow of public betrayal followed her. Some acquaintances still reached out, but inevitably, there were always whispers in the hallways. The woman who once seemed to have everything under control now lived trying to rebuild a reputation that would never be the same. Brandon continued his career in another state, but it took time to regain the trust of colleagues and patients. He didn't speak of Dallas, and whenever someone hinted at his personal life, he quickly changed the subject. Deep down, he knew that episode had been a turning point. The image of the irreproachable doctor was now behind him. Looking back, Andrew didn't see himself as a winner. The pain of betrayal still accompanied him on some silent nights, but he'd learned something valuable. Truth, however harsh, was always better than living by appearances. His public exposure wasn't driven only by anger, but by the need to free himself from a lie that would have imprisoned him had he stayed silent. One night, months after the divorce, sitting in his new living room, Andrew reflected on everything that had happened. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, stared into the void, and murmured to himself, "Sometimes, losing is the only way to win." It wasn't just about the marriage, but about the life he was beginning to rebuild, this time without illusions, without masks. The message was clear and echoed in his mind: trust, once broken, is rarely restored. But dignity, when defended, can be the foundation for a new beginning. Andrew discovered that true victory wasn't in destroying Melissa or Brandon, but in refusing to live a lie. And deep down, there was justice in what happened. Melissa, who so valued her public image, lost exactly what she tried hardest to preserve. Brandon, who fed on admiration, saw his reputation crumble. Andrew, who could have been the biggest victim, chose to be the man who faced the truth head-on. In the end, life moved each of them in different directions. Melissa tried to disappear from judging eyes. Brandon sought anonymity in another state. And Andrew, though scarred, discovered that fresh starts are possible, even when everything seems to have collapsed. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.
Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Miles Carter woke up that Thursday like any other day, with no idea his life was about to completely fall apart. At 41, he owned Sugarpine Bakery, a pastry shop he'd inherited from his grandparents when he was just 22. The place had become the heart of the small town where he grew up, known for its homemade sweets and cozy atmosphere that drew entire families in on weekends. It was right there, amid the ever-present scent of cinnamon and vanilla in the air, that Miles met the love of his life. Aubrey Sullivan was 20 years old when she first walked into the bakery on a rainy Friday afternoon. She ordered a chocolate cupcake and smiled in a way that made Miles realize he wanted to see her smiling like that every single day for the rest of his life. Their relationship started naturally and sweetly. Aubrey returned to the bakery almost daily after college, always with the excuse that she needed something sweet to give her energy to study. Miles discovered she was smart, ambitious, and dreamed of becoming a literature teacher. They spent hours talking about books while he prepared dough for the next day, and she always insisted on helping, even though her kitchen skills were questionable at best. They married 3 years later in a simple ceremony at the local church, with the whole community in attendance. Aubrey had graduated from college, and Miles, now 25, already had the bakery running smoothly, with loyal customers who'd known him since he was a child. In their first year of marriage, Aubrey got pregnant, and Lila was born on a sunny spring morning, bringing a joy Miles never imagined he could feel. The girl literally grew up among batches of bread and cakes, playing with her dolls while her dad worked, helping her mom set tables when customers arrived, and learning the family's recipe secrets from an early age. She was a clever, affectionate child who knew exactly how to charm every customer with her innocent smiles. During the first years of marriage, life seemed like a fairy tale. Aubrey earned a scholarship to study education at the State University, 40 minutes from home. She balanced her time between classes, the bakery, and caring for Lila, always showing incredible energy to manage it all. Miles was immensely proud watching his wife grow professionally, supporting every decision she made, from all-night study sessions to mandatory internships that sometimes kept her away from home for days at a time. When Lila turned 10, and Miles, 35, Aubrey finally achieved a dream. she was hired as a substitute teacher at the same university where she'd graduated. It was a temporary position, but she saw it as the first step toward the academic career she'd always wanted. Miles noticed how radiant she became whenever she talked about her classes, about the young students who respected her despite their small age difference, about the literary projects she wanted to develop. Aubrey's professional success brought subtle but noticeable changes to the family routine. She started coming home later, always with detailed explanations about extra meetings, work she needed to finish at the university, or academic events she considered important for her career. Miles noticed she began dressing more carefully in the mornings, choosing different outfits, spending more time on makeup, paying attention to details she'd previously ignored. Their conversations also gradually changed. Aubrey talked less about her day, answered Miles's questions more vaguely, always seeming preoccupied with other matters. When he tried discussing family plans, bakery improvements, or possible trips, she showed less interest, as if those topics had lost their importance. Lila also started making small comments about how her mom was always busy, always too tired to play or help with homework. Miles tried to be understanding and patient. He knew Aubrey was going through a crucial moment in her career and sincerely believed things would return to normal once she adjusted to her new work routine. To compensate for his wife's absence, he doubled down on caring for Lila, taking full responsibility for driving her to school every day, picking her up, helping with homework, attending every school meeting and academic event in her life. The bakery continued to do well, with a loyal clientele that grew every year. Miles had hired Sarah, a part-time employee, to help during busy hours, which gave him flexibility to better care for Lila and support Aubrey in her career. Regular customers always asked about his wife, and Miles proudly replied that she was building an important academic career at the university. On the surface, everything seemed to be running smoothly. The family had found a balance between professional and personal responsibilities. Lila was doing well in school, the bakery was thriving, and Aubrey seemed fulfilled by her work. Miles sincerely believed they'd built the perfect life. It was on that fateful Thursday, when Miles arrived at the bakery at 6 in the morning, as he'd done every day for over a decade, that he found something that would change everything forever. Tucked under the front door was a plain white envelope with no identification, only his name handwritten in a script he'd never seen before. At first, Miles thought it might be a customer complaint, maybe a forgotten bill, or perhaps a special order for a party. He absent-mindedly opened the envelope while turning on the lights and preparing the bakery for another day of work. Inside, he found a single sheet of paper with a sentence that made his world stop completely: "Not all love is as sweet as it seems." Along with the sentence was a photograph that made Miles have to lean against the counter to stay standing. It was Aubrey, his wife, his partner of more than a decade, passionately kissing a man he'd never seen in his life. Judging by the background, the photo had been taken in the university parking lot. The man looked young, clearly the age of Aubrey's students, with dark hair and a smile Miles would never forget. Miles sat down in the chair behind the counter and stared at that image, trying to process what his eyes were seeing. He studied every detail of the photo, the way Aubrey held the young man's face, how completely at ease and happy she looked, the obvious intimacy between them suggesting this was far from a one-time moment. Miles's hands trembled as he turned the photo over, hoping to find some explanation, some date, anything that could make sense of the situation. Throughout that entire day, Miles operated on autopilot. He greeted regular customers with his usual smiles and pleasantries, prepared the orders he'd promised, chatted about the weather and town gossip, but his mind was completely focused on the photograph he carried in his shirt pocket. Every free moment, he pulled it out to look again, as if hoping the image would magically change or disappear. When Sarah arrived for the afternoon shift, Miles made up an excuse about needing to handle some banking issues and left the bakery early. He drove aimlessly through the city streets, trying to organize his thoughts, trying to decide what to do with this devastating information. Part of him wanted to confront Aubrey immediately, demand explanations, yell, make a scene. Another part of him still hoped there was some innocent explanation for it all. When he got home that night, Aubrey was in the kitchen making dinner, just like she did every night. She asked about business at the bakery, chatted excitedly about a Brazilian literature class she'd taught that morning, helped Lila with a science project on the solar system. Miles watched every gesture, every word, every facial expression, desperately searching for signs of guilt, nervousness, or any indication she was hiding something terrible. But Aubrey seemed completely natural and carefree. She smiled when he kissed her cheek, held his hand during dinner, laughed at Lila's silly jokes about school friends. The normalcy of it all, the ease with which she moved between betrayal and family life, disturbed Miles even more than the discovery of the photo itself. During dinner, while Lila enthusiastically talked about a math test she'd taken at school, Miles found himself wondering how long this had been going on. Was the affair recent, the result of some sudden passion, or had it been happening for months, maybe even years? How many of the extra meetings and urgent work assignments Aubrey always mentioned were elaborate lies? How many times had she lied directly to him, looking him in the eyes and making up excuses for delays and absences? That night, lying beside his wife in the bed they'd shared for over a decade, Miles stayed awake watching Aubrey sleep. She looked peaceful and serene, breathing steadily, occasionally whispering unintelligible words in her dreams. Miles wondered if she was dreaming about the man in the photo, if she planned meetings with him even in her sleep, if the intimacy they shared in that bed had become a complete lie. Miles barely slept that night, tossing and turning while Aubrey slept peacefully beside him. He knew he needed concrete proof before making any decisions. The photo could be old, there could be an explanation, and he needed absolute certainty before destroying his family. The next morning, Friday, Miles made a decision: he would go to the university and discover the truth with his own eyes. He left Sarah in charge of the bakery, invented an excuse about needing to resolve banking issues, and drove to the campus where Aubrey worked. He parked near a cafe across from the university's main building and got a table with a perfect view of the entrance and parking lot. He ordered a cappuccino he barely touched and watched the flow of students and professors, his heart pounding and his hands sweating with nervousness. For 2 hours, Miles saw only the normal routine of a university: students coming and going, professors carrying stacks of papers, cleaning staff, nothing out of the ordinary. He started questioning whether he was being paranoid, whether this investigation even made sense. Then, at 4:30 in the afternoon, he saw Aubrey leave the building. But she wasn't alone, and Miles immediately recognized the man's face. It was exactly the same as in the photograph: dark hair, height, the smile Miles would never forget. There was no possible doubt. The two walked down the stairs talking intimately, laughing at private jokes, with a closeness that made it clear this was far from their first meeting. Miles felt his stomach turn when he noticed the obvious chemistry between them, the way they walked in sync, like two lovers deeply in love. When they reached Aubrey's car in the parking lot, the young man pulled her by the waist and kissed her exactly as in the photo. Miles watched his wife respond passionately, holding the young man's face with the same hands that touched him every night. At that moment, something inside Miles awakened. He wasn't going to just stand there passively watching the destruction of his marriage. He stood up, grabbed his phone, and walked out of the cafe toward the parking lot. His hands trembled, but he managed to turn on his phone's camera and started recording. Miles got close enough to capture clear images of the two kissing, hugging, whispering intimate words. The couple was so wrapped up in each other they didn't even notice his presence. Miles filmed for nearly 2 minutes, making sure he had irrefutable evidence of the affair. When they finally pulled apart, Miles quickly returned to the cafe and watched from a distance as the young man got into his own car and drove away. Aubrey waited a few minutes before leaving the parking lot, probably to avoid being seen leaving together. Miles drove home with his heart pounding and the evidence of the affair saved on his phone. Now he had not only the anonymous photo but also a video he'd recorded himself. It was enough proof that his wife had been lying for an unknown length of time. He arrived home before Aubrey, as he always did. Lila was in the living room doing homework when he walked in, still visibly shaken. The girl immediately noticed something was wrong. "Dad, are you okay?" "You're pale," Lila asked, dropping her books and walking over to him. Miles tried to hide it, but his hands were still trembling as he took his keys out of his pocket. That's when the photo of the affair fell to the floor. Lila saw the image before Miles could hide it. Even at just 16, Lila immediately understood what it meant. She looked at the photo, then at her father, and Miles saw the exact moment understanding dawned in her eyes. First came confusion, then disbelief, and finally a cold anger he'd never seen in her before. "Is that Mom?" Lila asked, her voice shaking. Miles nodded, unable to form words. He showed her the video he'd recorded just hours earlier, explaining about the anonymous letter, how he'd gone to the university and caught them together. Lila's reaction was completely unexpected. Instead of crying or being devastated, she showed frightening maturity. "She destroyed our family, Dad. People need to know who she really is." Miles tried arguing this was a family matter, but Lila was determined. "She always taught us lying was wrong, that we should always tell the truth. So let's show everyone the truth about her." After a long conversation, Miles eventually agreed. Together, they created a social media account and made a simple post, just the photo of Aubrey kissing the student, without long texts or unnecessary explanations. The truth spoke for itself. The result was devastating. Within hours, the post was shared hundreds of times. Aubrey's colleagues at the university began commenting, students tagged friends, and within a day the entire community knew about the affair. The university received dozens of angry calls questioning how they allowed relationships between teachers and students. And Aubrey didn't come home that night. The next day, Miles woke up to a phone full of messages. Some offering support, others just wanting gossip. The bakery was packed with people who rarely showed up, all claiming to show solidarity but really just looking for scandal details. Around 2 in the afternoon, Aubrey called, hysterical. She screamed about how Miles had destroyed her career, how he could expose such a private situation like that. Miles listened silently, and when she finished, he simply said, "You chose to make this public when you decided to kiss a student in the parking lot of the university where you work." Then he hung up. Half an hour later, Aubrey stormed into the bakery furious. But when she walked in, she got the shock of her life. Sitting at the tables were her parents, siblings, some cousins, and even her in-laws. They'd all seen the post, all knew about the affair, and all were there silently supporting Miles. Aubrey tried to explain, but her words came out confused and contradictory. Sometimes she claimed the relationship was recent, other times she admitted it had lasted months. She tried blaming Miles for becoming distant, but each justification only confirmed the affair to everyone present. Aubrey's father stood up, walked over to her, and simply said, "You disappointed all of us." Then he walked out of the bakery. One by one, the other relatives did the same, leaving Aubrey alone in the middle of the shop, humiliated in front of the entire town. The following week, the university fired Aubrey. Officially, they claimed her trial period had ended, but everyone knew it was because of the scandal. The divorce was quick. Aubrey was so desperate to leave town she agreed to all conditions. Miles kept Lila, the house, the bakery, and she waived any alimony. Months later, curiosity about who'd sent the anonymous letter consumed Miles. That's when he received an unexpected call from Jenna Whitmore, a childhood friend who'd returned to town a few years earlier. They met at a cafe, and after some casual conversation, Jenna made a shocking confession: "I was the one who sent the letter." Miles was stunned. Jenna explained she worked at the university and had seen Aubrey with the students several times. At first, she thought they were just having academic conversations, but she realized there was something more. "I've known you since we were kids. I knew what kind of person you were. I just couldn't accept you continuing to live a lie." But the biggest revelation was still to come. Jenna confessed something Miles never imagined: "I've always liked you, since we were children. I was afraid to tell you personally because you might think I was trying to sabotage your marriage for my own benefit." the two began meeting more often. Miles discovered in Jenna something he'd lost with Aubrey: honesty, loyalty, and a connection based on real values. Lila immediately approved of her presence. She's different from Mom. She looks at you when she talks, she really pays attention. A few months later, Jenna made a surprising proposal. She wanted to quit her job at the university and work at the bakery. I've always loved this place, and I want to start over too. Miles agreed, and she became his partner in both business and life. Meanwhile, Aubrey simply disappeared. After she moved away, she never tried contacting Lila. There were rumors she was trying to start over in another state, but to Miles and Lila, she had become just a distant memory. Sugarpine Bakery flourished like never before. With Jenna by Miles's side, they expanded the menu, created baking classes, and turned the place into a true community hub. Lila, now 19, had become a mature young woman who talked about taking over the family business in the future. But the biggest revelation of all came 3 years later, in a casual conversation between Miles and Lila. The young woman, now 19 and more mature, made a confession that changed everything. "Dad, I need to tell you something. I already knew about Mom's affair months before that letter arrived." Miles was speechless. Lila explained she'd accidentally seen messages on Aubrey's phone, noticed the lies about schedules, observed her mother's behavioral changes. "I was trying to gather the courage to tell you when that letter showed up. Honestly, I was relieved you finally found out." The final revelation was even more shocking. "I knew we had to publicly expose her because I found out she was part of a group of teachers who thought it was normal to date students at the university. If we didn't do something drastic, she'd never stop." Miles realized his daughter had shown more wisdom and courage than many adults would have. She protected the family the only way she knew how, by exposing the truth in a way that was impossible to ignore. Miles's story spread throughout the region as an example of how the truth always comes out, and how the people who truly love us are the ones willing to save us from lies, even if it causes temporary pain. Jenna could have stayed silent, Lila could have kept the secret. But both chose truth over convenience. Years later, when telling his story to other parents at the bakery, Miles always ended with the same reflection: sometimes, the person who destroys your life is the one you least expect. But there's always someone willing to save you, even if you don't know it yet. Sugarpine Bakery is still operating today, now run by Miles, Jenna, and Lila, who graduated in business administration and returned to take over part of the business. On the main wall of the bakery hangs a photo of the three of them smiling, with a phrase underneath: "Someone who truly loves you doesn't hide, they stay, even when everything falls apart." Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.
Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Sophie and Matthew were the kind of couple everyone envied. They met in high school, two 16-year-olds sharing the same desk in biology class. She was smart, determined, had this way of talking about environmental preservation that fascinated him. They decided together to study forestry engineering, studied side by side every night throughout college, graduated with honors, and landed jobs at the same environmental consulting firm. Marriage came naturally. She wore a simple dress, he was too nervous to tie his tie properly, but it was the happiest day of his life. The first few years were like a dream. They worked together, came home together, planned their future together. When James was born, Matthew held him in his arms and thought, "This is perfection. This is what it means to have a family." Emma arrived 2 years later, a clever little girl who inherited her mother's passion for nature. Lucas completed the family 3 years after that, an energetic boy who turned any room into an amusement park. To outsiders, they were the perfect definition of marital success. Sophie and Matthew had achieved everything they dreamed of as teenagers: solid careers, 3 healthy kids, a comfortable home, financial stability. But appearances can be very deceiving. Routine slowly began to consume them. They'd wake up, get the kids ready for school, go to work, come home exhausted, have dinner, put the little ones to bed, and collapse on the couch watching whatever was on TV. Weekends were dominated by the kids' activities, James's soccer, Emma's dance classes, playground trips with Lucas. Talking about anything beyond work and kids became rare. The romance that brought them together was replaced by a practical partnership. They split chores, bills, responsibilities, but lost that intimate connection that once made their eyes light up when they looked at each other. Sophie complained Matthew was always too tired to go out. He complained she prioritized everything over spending time together as a couple. It was in this context that Christopher Hayes appeared. March 2024, son of the company's owner, 28 years old, freshly graduated in business administration from a prestigious university. He arrived full of energy, talking about innovation, sustainability, revolutionary projects that would transform the environmental industry. Matthew has to admit, at first, he was impressed. The guy actually knew what he was talking about. Christopher had that confidence only someone who's never faced real hardship possesses. He spoke about climate change with the passion of someone who just discovered the topic, proposed solutions as if no one had ever thought of them before. But he was charismatic, polite, respectful toward more experienced employees. Sophie was assigned to mentor him on his first projects, and Matthew thought it was a great opportunity for her to showcase her skills. The first few weeks went normally. Sophie came home recounting meetings, Christopher's ideas, how stimulating it was to work with someone so motivated. She seemed excited about work again, something she hadn't felt in years. Finally, someone who understands the importance of what we do, she'd say. Matthew was happy to see her like that. But then, by the end of March, things changed drastically. Sophie started mentioning Christopher excessively. Christopher suggested this, Christopher is right about that, Christopher and I developed a new methodology. His name popped up in practically every work-related conversation. When Matthew joked that she talked more about Christopher than about him, she'd laugh nervously and change the subject. By the first week of April, the signs became alarming. Sophie started coming home much later. Always with elaborate explanations, meetings that ran long, last-minute client calls, urgent reports that needed finishing. She constantly checked her phone, something she'd never done before. When it rang during dinner, she'd apologize and take the call in another room. If Matthew asked who it was, she always had a quick answer, coworker, supplier, client. The phone conversations were whispered. Whenever Matthew walked into the room during her calls, Sophie would quickly end them with a rushed, "We'll talk later." Her phone was always face down, she changed the password he'd known for years. What bothered Matthew most was how she talked about Christopher. Her eyes sparkled when mentioning his ideas, she smiled in a way Matthew hadn't been able to make her smile in a long time. By the second week of April, Sophie started working on Saturdays. Special project Christopher's leading, she explained. Tight deadline, you know how it is. Matthew offered to help, but she always refused. The intimacy between them disappeared completely. Sophie was always too tired, too stressed, too preoccupied with projects. It was during the third week of April that everything changed. Matthew was returning from a meeting with suppliers when he remembered he'd forgotten some important documents in his office. They were contracts he needed to review at home, so he went back to get them. The building was nearly empty, most employees had already left. As he walked down the second-floor hallway, Matthew heard a familiar voice coming from one of the conference rooms. It was Sophie, but the tone was different, more intimate, more affectionate than she'd sounded with him in months. Something in his stomach clenched. He should have kept walking, grabbed the documents, and left. But something made him stop and listen. "This is getting too complicated," Sophie was saying. "My husband's starting to suspect something. Yesterday he asked why I've been working so much on Saturdays." A male voice responded, "Christopher. Do you think we should stop?" Sophie's reply hit Matthew like lightning, "I know I should, but when I'm with you, I feel alive again. Matthew stood there, hidden behind the wall, listening to his wife confess feelings for another man. Christopher said, I feel the same. Olivia's a good wife, but with you, it's different. It's like you understand who I really am. Sophie replied, I have to end this before someone gets hurt. I have 3 kids, Matthew trusts me completely. Christopher reassured her, we'll find a way to handle this. Maybe we can be more discreet for now. Sophie agreed, you're right. We need to be more careful. Your girls depend on you, and my kids, they love their father. It felt like Matthew was being punched in the stomach over and over. Matthew left without being seen, completely forgetting the documents he'd come back for. He drove home on autopilot, his mind processing what he'd just discovered. Just 3 weeks after Christopher arrived, Sophie was throwing away 15 years of marriage for an affair with the boss's son. He got home, and the kids ran to hug him as they always did. James was excited because he'd scored a goal at practice, Emma wanted to show him a drawing she'd made at school, Lucas needed help putting together a puzzle. There, hugging his children, reality hit Matthew full force. He'd have to reveal the truth, but he'd do it the right way. Sophie arrived 2 hours later, kissed his forehead as always, asked about his day. He replied normally, but inside, he was dying. She helped the kids with homework, made dinner, chatted about trivial things as if nothing had changed. That night, while she slept beside him, Matthew stayed awake, planning exactly how he'd act. Matthew knew he could confront Sophie right then, but he had a better plan. Christopher was also married, and Matthew quickly looked him up on social media. He discovered his wife, Olivia, was an art teacher, mother of 2 little girls aged 6 and 4, who constantly posted family photos. Christopher playing with the girls at the park, romantic dinners celebrating anniversaries, weekend trips. The latest photo was recent, Christopher and Olivia hugging, celebrating 8 years of marriage. The next morning, Matthew had already decided everything. He'd invite both families for dinner the following Saturday. Sophie and Christopher would be uncomfortable, but refusing would raise suspicion. And there, in his own home, with all the children present, he'd reveal the whole truth. Over the next 2 days, Matthew watched Sophie with new eyes, now knowing exactly what was going on. On Thursday morning, he approached Christopher during the coffee break. Christopher, any plans for Saturday night? He looked surprised, nothing specific, why? Matthew explained that Sophie and he would like to invite Christopher and his family over for dinner at home. It's always good to get to know co-workers better outside the office, he said, watching his reaction. Christopher visibly hesitated. Matthew could see the wheels turning in his head, calculating the risks. That's an interesting idea. Let me talk to Olivia and I'll confirm tomorrow. Matthew replied, perfect. Sophie will be very happy. She always says how pleasant it is to work with you. He saw Christopher swallow hard when Sophie's name came up. That night, Matthew told Sophie about the invitation. Her reaction was revealing. She nearly dropped the glass of water she was holding. You did what? She asked, as if he'd announced the end of the world. She tried arguing that the house was messy, that she needed more time to prepare, that the kids might get too rowdy. Matthew calmly countered each objection. It's already decided, Sophie. Christopher will confirm tomorrow. Throughout Friday, he watched her quietly panic. More whispered phone calls. She and Christopher were clearly trying to figure out a strategy to survive the dinner without raising suspicion. Christopher confirmed attendance Friday morning, but Matthew noticed he was tense and worried. Saturday arrived, and Matthew was surprisingly calm. He'd planned every detail, lasagna as the main dish because it was easy to serve and the kids loved it, simple green salad, garlic bread, and ice cream for dessert. He set up a background music playlist, arranged the dining room, prepared games to keep the kids entertained. Sophie spent the day cooking, more nervous than Matthew had seen her in years. She asked for the 10th time if he was sure it was a good idea. Why would it be a bad idea? They're just co-workers having dinner together, Matthew replied. The kids were excited. James had picked out some video games to show, Emma organized her favorite books, Lucas chose the toys he wanted to share. Christopher and Olivia arrived promptly at 7:30. Olivia brought a bouquet of flowers for Sophie and a bottle of wine for Matthew. Their two little girls hid shyly behind their mother but were soon won over by Matthew's kids' energy. Sarah, the older one, quickly became interested in Emma's books. Mia, the youngest, was fascinated by Lucas's toys. Olivia was exactly as Matthew had imagined, sweet, intelligent, genuinely interested in getting to know their family. She complimented the house, chatted animatedly with Sophie about recipes, and was charmed by the kids. "You have a beautiful family," she said. "The children are so well-mannered and affectionate." Christopher was visibly tense but tried to keep up appearances. During the first hour, everything went surprisingly normally. The kids played together in the living room while the adults chatted in the kitchen. Olivia talked about her art classes, Sophie spoke about company projects, Matthew served drinks and appetizers. Christopher joined the conversations, laughed at the right moments, but Matthew watched every micro-expression, every glance exchanged between him and Sophie. When they sat down to eat, Matthew skillfully steered the conversation toward topics that increased tension. He spoke about the importance of honesty in relationships, how trust was fundamental for a solid family, how lies always ended up being discovered. Olivia enthusiastically agreed with everything, while Sophie and Christopher barely touched their food. "You know," Matthew said, calmly cutting a piece of lasagna, "I've always believed that the truth, no matter how painful, is always better than a comfortable lie." Olivia clapped, "Exactly. Honesty is the foundation of any healthy relationship." Sophie tried to change the subject by asking if anyone wanted more salad, but Matthew continued. He spoke about how important it was to set an example for children, how they learned more from their parents' actions than their words. "When we lie to our kids, we're teaching them dishonesty is acceptable," Matthew said. James, who was paying attention, asked, "Dad, do you and Mom always tell us the truth?" Matthew replied, looking directly at Sophie, "I always do, son." The tension at the table was palpable. Christopher was sweating despite the air conditioning being on, Sophie nervously fiddled with her food, Olivia continued participating naturally in the conversation, unaware of what was happening. When they finished the main course, Matthew stood up to get dessert. Instead of ice cream, Matthew returned with a bottle of champagne and glasses for all the adults. "I'd like to propose a toast," he announced. Everyone raised their glasses, waiting for his words. The kids stopped playing and turned their attention to Matthew. He looked directly at Sophie, then at Christopher. "To the truth," Matthew said, "and to the end of lies." There was a moment of confused silence. Olivia smiled, thinking it was a philosophical toast. Sophie whispered, "Matthew, please," but he continued, "3 weeks ago, my wife and Christopher began an extramarital affair. They meet secretly, lie to their families, and build their happiness on our pain." The champagne slipped through Olivia's fingers as she dropped her glass. It shattered on the floor, but no one moved to clean it up. Sophie began to cry, covering her face with her hands. Christopher opened and closed his mouth like a fish out of water. The kids were frightened by the sudden tension, some started crying without understanding what was happening. "Matthew, stop this," Sophie begged between sobs. "Christopher," Olivia whispered, her voice breaking, "is this true?" Christopher tried to explain, "Olivia, I can explain," but she interrupted him, "So it's true." Her voice was barely audible, heavy with pain and disbelief. Lucas, Matthew's youngest son, asked in his little voice, "Why are you fighting?" Matthew knelt beside him, "Sometimes, son, people do wrong things and hurt those they're supposed to protect." Sophie kept sobbing, "The children," Matthew replied, "the children deserve to know the truth, Sophie." They deserve to understand why our family is falling apart. Christopher finally found his voice. Matthew, I know this looks terrible, but things are more complicated than. Matthew cut him off. Complicated? You have a wife who loves you, 2 daughters who depend on you, and you decided to risk all that. Why? Because you were bored? Because you could? Olivia was shaking her head, still processing the information. 8 years of marriage, our daughters. Christopher tried to approach her. Olivia, let me explain in private. But she shouted, explain what? How can you explain this? Her daughters started crying, frightened by their mother yelling. James approached Matthew. Dad, is Mom going to leave? His son's question pierced Matthew's heart like an arrow. All his calculated anger gave way to raw pain. He pulled the boy into a tight hug. I'll talk to you about some changes that are going to happen. But I want you to know I love you more than anything in the world, and that will never change. Christopher tried to approach his daughters, but Olivia physically blocked him. Leave, she said, her voice firm despite her tears. Leave now. I need to think. Christopher pleaded, Olivia, please, but she screamed, leave. The shout echoed through the house, frightening the children even more. Christopher looked around the room, crying children, Sophie sobbing, Olivia trembling with anger, Matthew watching everything with an unreadable expression. Matthew, I'm sorry, Matthew replied coldly, your feelings are irrelevant now. You made your choices. We all did. Christopher grabbed his keys from the table and walked out the front door. The sound of the door closing echoed like a gunshot. Olivia gathered her daughters, still crying, and headed for the door. She stopped beside Matthew and whispered, Thank you for telling me the truth. Even though it hurts so much. She looked at Sophie one last time. I hope it was worth destroying 2 families. Then she left with the girls. Matthew was left alone with his shattered family. Sophie kept crying, the kids were confused and scared, the dining room looked like a battlefield. Sophie looked at him through her tears. You got what you wanted. You destroyed everything. Matthew felt anger rise again. I destroyed? I started secretly meeting another man? I lied to our kids every night? Sophie tried to justify herself. I was going to end it with him. I was going to tell you. Matthew asked, when? When you decided you'd had enough fun? She stood up from her chair. You can hate me as much as you want, but doing this in front of the kids, in front of his wife, that was cruel. Matthew replied, the cruelty, Sophie, was you choosing to betray our family. I just chose for the truth to be known by everyone it affects. Sophie went upstairs to the bedroom, slammed the door, and Matthew was left alone with his 3 children. They looked at him, waiting for answers he barely knew how to give. Matthew knelt on the floor and opened his arms. All 3 ran to him, and there, holding the only people who truly mattered, he finally allowed his own tears to fall. In the months that followed, everything changed quickly. Sophie moved out a week after the dinner, went to live with her sister. They immediately started divorce proceedings. Christopher lost his job when Richard Hayes, his father, found out about the scandal. Apparently, the old man had strict principles about moral behavior and fired his own son. Olivia also filed for divorce and moved to another city with her daughters. Matthew later learned she told Christopher she never wanted to see his face again. The company went through restructuring, several employees were reassigned, and the work environment remained tense for months. Matthew and the kids went through family therapy to deal with the situation. It was hard explaining to them what had happened, but Matthew always told the truth, adjusted for each child's age. James, being the oldest, understood the situation better. Emma was confused for a while, struggling to understand why her mother had done something she knew was wrong. Lucas, the youngest, just missed having his mom at home. Sophie tried to convince Matthew to give their marriage a second chance. She said it was a mistake, that she regretted it, that Christopher had seduced her. But Matthew knew those were just empty words. Trust had been broken beyond repair. Besides, he'd seen how naturally she could lie to her own children. How could he believe anything she said now? Today, a year after that dinner, Matthew and the kids have rebuilt their lives. They spend weekends with Sophie, who lives in a small apartment on the other side of town. Their relationship with their mother is complicated. They love her, but they know she let them down. Sophie works at another company now. Matthew hasn't heard anything about Christopher since. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.